And this did not move Madame Sheyi, who continued to treat children with disdain. All the children in the school hated Madame Sheyi, but this did not bother her at all, as she never liked them as well. Once upon a time, there lived a woman named Madame Sheyi. Madame Sheyi was a primary school teacher in the community school, and all the children feared her because of how wicked she was. Whenever Madame Sheyi walked into a place, the children scampered for safety as they feared being whipped by her. Many have rumored that Madame Sheyi's hatred for children was the reason why her husband left her many years ago and married another woman. One morning, Madame Sheyi slapped a little girl for coming to school late, and the girl lost her hearing in the process. She never bothered to listen to the little girl's reasons for coming late, as she hated children so much and looked for every given opportunity to unleash her terror upon them. What she did not know was that the little girl just lost her mother the previous night and decided to come to school, despite the fact that she was in mourning. When the news spread around the school, some teachers approached Madame Sheyi to advise her to be more gentle with the children, but Madame Sheyi told them off, saying that they should all mind their business. The little girl's father ended up withdrawing his daughter from the school after the incident, and this did not move Madame Sheyi, who continued to treat children with disdain. All the children in the school hated Madame Sheyi, but this did not bother her at all, as she never liked them as well. One day, Madame Sheyi was walking around the school premises when she came across a little boy playing by the bush path. She approached him and asked why he was not in class, but the little boy ignored her question. Furious as to why the little boy refused to answer her question, Madame Sheyi picked up a stick and began to whip the little boy uncontrollably. She whipped him for some minutes and noticed that the little boy did not flinch. Madame Sheyi became so furious and raised her hand to slap him when she received a very hot slap from an unknown hand. She turned to look for the little boy, but he was nowhere to be found. It was then that Madame Sheyi realized that she had been slapped by a ghost. Madame Sheyi screamed in terror as some teachers gathered around her, wondering what had happened. Madame Sheyi tried to explain to them that she had been slapped by a ghost, but noticed that she could no longer speak or hear. She was now deaf and dumb and couldn't explain what had happened to her fellow teachers who had gathered around her. Madame Sheyi returned home confused, as she did all she could to hear and speak, but nothing seemed to work. For days, no one saw Madame Sheyi in school, and the children jubilated at the fact that Madame Sheyi was no longer around to rain terror on them. From being the most feared teacher in the school, Madame Sheyi became an object of ridicule amongst the teachers and students. She moved from one herbalist to another, looking for a remedy to her problem, but couldn't find any, as no herbalist was able to restore her speech and hearing. For months, Madame Sheyi remained in her hut alone, hoping for a miracle to happen. One afternoon, whilst Madame Sheyi was home, she heard a loud cry and was shocked to realize that she could hear again. Madame Sheyi was so excited as she believed her hearing had been fully restored. However, what she did not know was that all she could hear was the loud cry and nothing else. Madame Sheyi was so confused and decided to follow the sound of the cry, hoping that it would lead her to the little boy who rendered her deaf and dumb. She walked for some minutes, and the more she walked, the more the cry grew louder as it directed her to a very small hut stationed by the river bank. Madam Sheyi entered into the hut and caught sight of the little girl she slapped in school, who went deaf and was withdrawn by her father. Her name was Bimbo, and she was all alone in her hut with her sick father, who was extremely sick and about to die. Madam Sheyi, on seeing this, assisted Bimbo's father to a nearby herbalist for treatment. She looked at Bimbo and noticed how hungry and unkempt she looked, and decided to take her home to prepare a delicious meal for her. Seeing the deplorable state of Bimbo and the fact that Bimbo's deafness was caused by her own slap broke Madam Sheyi's heart as she began to regret her past actions. Madam Sheyi made up her mind in that moment to look after Bimbo and her sick father as a way of making up for her past wrongs. She ensured that the little girl and her sick father were well taken care of, and as time passed, the girl's father's health began to improve. Still unable to speak or hear, Madam Sheyi began to be more compassionate, as losing her hearing and speech made her realize how important it was to show kindness, as the villagers all discriminated against her, believing that she was cursed. Her only means of communication was through gestures and actions, and the only people who communicated and associated with her were Bimbo and her father, who forgave her for what she did to Bimbo. One morning, Madam Sheyi was in her hut alone crying when a bright light overshadowed her in the hut. She saw the little boy, who made her deaf and dumb, walk in from the light, and Madam Sheyi, filled with fear, realized that the little boy was not there to harm her. Instead, he gestured to her, guiding her hands to her ears and mouth. In that moment, Madam Sheyi felt a warm sensation, and to her amazement, she could hear and speak once again. Filled with extreme gratitude, Madam Sheyi tried to thank the little boy, but before she could utter a word, he vanished into the same bright light. Madam Sheyi, filled with excitement, rushed to Bimbo and her father's hut to inform them of what had happened, and noticed that Bimbo too could now hear. She narrated everything that transpired with the little boy, revealing that the boy had a birthmark on his hand, and Bimbo's father began to weep as he revealed that the little boy was Bimbo's twin brother who died a few years ago. It was such an emotional moment for them all, and from that day forward, Madam Sheyi became a changed person. She no longer hated children and treated them kindly. She returned back to school and dedicated her life to helping others and mending the wrongs she had done in the past. Madam Sheyi continued to care for Bimbo and her father, and soon later, Bimbo's father fell in love with her and asked her to marry him. They got married, and that was how Madam Sheyi became the stepmother of the girl who she once made deaf. She looked after Bimbo all her life and did everything within her power to live right. Her once fearful presence turned into one of compassion and understanding, and the villagers, including the children in the school, loved her new and transformed self as she became a beloved figure in the community. The lesson to be learned from this story is that harboring hatred and cruelty not only harms others, but can lead to our own downfall. The story encourages us to be mindful of our behavior and recognize the ripple effect it can have on those around us. Always be kind to others, as you never know what they are going through. I hope you enjoyed the story.
Like, subscribe and leave a comment. It helps us grow our channel. I'll see you in our next story. Bye.